Cut taxes, reduce benefit increases, raise the retirement age, delay net zero commitments. That is Liz Truss's recipe for reversing the economic decline, which, she argues in a major speech today, has been produced by decades of economic consensus. It comes almost a year on from the mini-budget in which she tried to pursue some of these ideas, which was followed by a run on the pound, a surge in interest rates, the sacking of her Chancellor and her eviction from Downing Street after just 40-odd days in office. She was, she now says, in a bit of a rush. But could she nevertheless have a point about what Britain needs to do in the future? Let's discuss that with Chris Giles, economics editor at the Financial Times, and Catherine McBride, free market economist and fellow of the Centre for Brexit Policy. Morning, both.
Good morning.
Hi.
Let's start with the past and then let's move on to the future. So on the past, first of all, Catherine, a crucial claim Liz Truss makes today is that she was not pursuing what were dubbed unfunded tax cuts. This despite the fact that the cost of the tax cuts in that mini budget was £45 billion over 5 years, a cut to the top rate of tax, a cut to corporation tax. Do you think she's got a point that it wasn't unfunded?
Yes, you're assuming that there is no benefits from cutting taxes and that you won't increase revenue. And yet there have been many instances where when we cut taxes, people are more inclined to pay taxes. It's very important that we keep a lot of businesses in the UK. And we are sitting right next to Ireland, which now has a corporation tax of about half of ours. And they're allowed to write off most of their expenses against their taxes. So a company who sits there can pay a lot less tax than one that sits in the UK. We have to make ourselves competitive now that we're outside the EU. We have to look for a unique selling point.
Let's come to the future remedies in a second. But her problem then was this, wasn't it? You may be right, you may be wrong, but she couldn't persuade the Office for Budget Responsibility to back that idea that tax cuts create more tax revenue. So she ignored them and sacked the top official at the Treasury who would have told her that.
Well, yes, she did do both of those things. And having looked very extensively at the OBR's forecasts for Brexit trade, I can tell you that I don't think they're really experts in that field.
OK, let's bring Chris Giles in on that and then come back to you for what your remedy is or your prescription more broadly for the future. Chris, they weren't unfunded, they would have paid for themselves.
Yeah, it's just nonsense, really. They're completely unfunded. The OBR's job is to look at whatever economic results come from any tax changes. It's not in that sense static. They look at whether there's going to be a huge economic boom coming from tax cuts, and they said there wasn't. In fact, the OBR have done quite a lot of research more recently and found they've generally been too optimistic rather than too pessimistic about the economic results of tax changes. So to suggest it was unfunded is just talking nonsense.
Catherine McBride?
Well, I would like to ask Chris if he thought that the payment subsidies to everyone's fuel bills was equally unfunded. What amused me about people, commentators, not just yourself, but also the Financial Times, is that they seem to think that we could magic up this payment for everyone's fuel costs, which the OBR actually predicted would be £70 billion worth, so much more than the tax cuts. Yet there wasn't a squeak out of any of you about where this money was going to come from.
Tempted as I am to go down that route, Catherine.
Bigger deal.
I want to ask you, in a sense, as someone who still believes in this basic prescription, given the trouble she got into, the trouble that drove her out of office, what could someone with that agenda, her or someone else, do differently next time? And I'll put that to Chris.
What could she do differently? Well, the thing you want to do differently, if you want to raise the growth rate, is not to make promises which the whole world thinks are unrealistic. You need to make promises which are well-funded, well-costed, and actually have a good chance of success. And the worst thing you can do is lose the confidence of the world, particularly if you're the UK, because we rely on the rest of the world to borrow from.
Catherine?
Well, I think that it wasn't quite like that. There were several things going on at the same time. We'd had 10-year gilt yields had gone from about 0 to 3% in about 18 months, and that was before Liz Truss came into office. And this had already upset any pension fund that was using LDI investments to pay for their pension.
Just to remind people, the problems over LDI, it's argued, isn't it, and I think you are arguing, would have created their own economic crisis without anything Liz Truss did.
Yes, they were. And the sell-off actually started after the Bank of England made its announcement the day before, after the monetary policy notes, which you can still read and you can still see the date on them.
Let me just put your broader point to Chris Giles,
could I?
It could be the case, Chris Giles, couldn't it, that indeed people are officially commentating on this, whether the Office for Budget Responsibility or the Bank of England, and the former governor has condemned her, Liz Truss, for producing the economics of Argentina on the channel, that you are all prisoners of an economic orthodoxy. And the reason we elect politicians is we elect people who should be allowed to take risks, to try things out, to innovate.
Absolutely. That's exactly why we elect people. And if they innovate and it goes horribly wrong, we also like to get rid of them. And the Conservative Party did that rather quickly last year.
But Catherine McBride, you think those policies, and perhaps her, should have another run?
Well, I definitely think the policies need to have another run. And I was very delighted to read in the Financial Times that in an interview with Keir Starmer, he actually talked about how it's not just about tax, we need growth. I think that was your finishing line, Chris.
Catherine McBride, we've got to leave it there. Yep.
Okay. Well, we need growth, and it's got to come from somewhere.
We got that message. Catherine's from the Centre for Brexit Policy. Chris Giles, economics editor at the FT. Thanks for joining us.